virtual alumni speaker series. I am grateful to have the opportunity to come together with our community and our wonderful panelists that are joining me this afternoon. For those in the community I've not been blessed to connect with yet, my name is April Irvin, and I am the new Director of Alumni Relations and Annual Giving. And I have the blessed opportunity to engage with our alumni, to speak with our alumni, to support our alumni, and also to share just all the extraordinary gifts that God has placed in our alumni. So that is what we're going to be doing today. As I shared, this is the second in our series. We had an opportunity, back in May. We had our first virtual speaker series, and the title of it was The Bible in a Time of Pandemic. And clearly we are still dealing with that pandemic, so very relevant. And we had Dr. Kimberly Rossall and Dr. Amy Lindeman Allen that joined us for that panel. But this afternoon, we have the opportunity to have three of our extraordinary CTS alumni in our counseling center. And our topic today is healing the wounds of racism, faith, mental health, and the African-American community. And as I shared with the group yesterday, that this was not my idea, the title for this event, or this speaker series. This was in my prayer time with God, to really focus on really the healing process that many of us have. Some of us have gone through, but many of us have not gone through when we look at racism. And we recognize kind of where we are in our country right now in dealing with that. So before I introduce our panelists, I just want to share something, because we know as people of faith that God is so very intentional. And so I want to share something from the devotional that I read in the morning, from the Jesus Calling devotional. And I just picked this devotional up a few weeks ago. And every year that I pick it back up and read the date, it is so exactly what I need to hear for that day. So I'll just share this. It's August 20th, and it reads, I am a God who heals. I heal broken bodies, broken minds, broken hearts, broken lives, and broken relationships. My very presence has immense healing powers. You cannot live close to me without experiencing some degree of healing. However, it is also true that you have not because you ask not. You receive the healing that flows naturally from my presence, whether you seek it or not. But there is more, much more, available to those who ask. So it goes on, and it references the scripture in 2 Corinthians, where Paul is speaking about the thorn in his side and the healing. So recognition that healing, God takes us through that healing journey. But I just thought it was very relevant for today, given that this was the topic that he raised for us. So as we go into this dialogue around healing the wounds of racism, I want to have the opportunity for our amazing alums, panelists, to introduce themselves. And I am going to start with Hazel Owens. If you want to introduce yourself and just share a little bit about your journey in ministry and counseling and kind of where you are today.
So, hi everyone, my name is Hazel Owens. I am a recent grad of CTS. This is a career change for me. My background is in business, with the aspirations of being a corporate trainer. However, through my own healing journey and my own spiritual journey, I found myself in counseling, and realized how much that meant to me and how much that has helped shape me in my own healing and spirituality and all of everything in between, and prompted me to do more with that. I didn't ask for this, it kind of chose me. And so here we are. So I am a resident at the CTS Counseling Center. I'm a Bible teacher. I'm an associate pastor. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Excellent. Thank you, Hazel. Lee, can we have you introduce yourself?
Peace. My name is Lee Ivy. Um, I could name many hats that I wear, that we all wear. Just being Black in America, like you named earlier, healer, um, being one of them, but also, you know, there's a sense of brokenness that exists within the healer that I think allows and enables the healer to do the healing. Um, and I wear that brokenness, and I allow it to inform me in my being. So, Father, pastor, teacher, lover, um, we're here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lee. That's beautiful. Thank you. Sharon? Think you might.
Yeah, might want to unmute.
That's all right.
So, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Mason. I am a mother. I'm a wife. I'm a grandmother. Let's see. I'm staff therapist at CTS. Tell a little bit about the journey into this ministry, into this line of work. Had amazing grandparents, and I believe their relationship really was awesome within the community. Didn't see a lot of relationships that were intact, but theirs was, and it made me decide I wanted to be a marriage and family therapist at some point. A lot of other things transpired as well, but I love this work. I know how it has impacted me. Went through spiritual recovery myself. Actually had to go through it several times, and this is a lifelong journey, and so love the work. It's imperative and it's ongoing and it's so necessary in our community, but within the world overall. So looking forward to this discussion and just grateful to be here.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you to each of you for sharing about your journeys, because I truly believe there is power in our stories as to why we are where we are in the times that we are in our lives. So as we shared, our topic today is healing the wounds of racism. And Lee, I love it that you raised the fact that each of us have brokenness within us. And I think that, you know, with what we've experienced in the last few months, with the murder of George Floyd and all of the things that have occurred over the last few months, but not just the last few months, decades and generations, there is just a significant level of trauma that the African-American community has experienced related to racism. And so I just want to talk to you guys a little bit, just getting your perspectives on where we are as a community and as a country as it relates to race right now. I'll start with you, Lee.
I think there are many starting places to a question like this. I think that we could place our feet, begin our footsteps in many different soils to engage this conversation. I would say that I don't think our feet have moved far since this journey began. If we go back to Middle Passage, you know, I think we have a long way to go. I think we have a lot more people who are coming to an understanding, coming to enlightenment on the subject, realizing how they have been impacted by racism and institutions of racism. And so it's literally impossible for a person to not have experienced racism. What is very possible is that a person might not realize that they have been impacted by racism. But it's impossible to live in this country and not be impacted by racism. It is in the education, it is in the structures, the systems, all of it. And I think we are moving toward, I guess, attempting to create a system that is not racism savvy. And I don't know how possible that is. I think I'll stop right there.
Okay. No, thank you. I appreciate you openly sharing. And it is that recognition that all of us have experienced some level of racism. And I do want us to talk about that a little bit. Sharon, what are your thoughts right now, just where we are?
So I'll pick up where we left off So as he was speaking to the lack of awareness of experiencing racism, I had to think about my own story. I was insulated in many ways, had opportunities that some people may not have had who looked like me, and in various ways, I didn't even realize things that I had been experiencing, or I didn't take them for what they were. And so, with that protection, sometimes looking at what others who look like me were experiencing, I didn't take it as to have the magnitude, to have the impact. And once I was able to see how I had experienced it, how others had experienced it, it's a whole new level of understanding. Once your eyes are open, you can't close them. You know, you can't unexperience, you can't unsee, you can't unhear, and it just takes you back. It's very hard to even put into words, and so I was thinking about how, in some ways, like my personality, in some ways, even like education, in various ways, some people, and I'll actually say to get a pass. In some ways, getting a pass and not having to experience certain things, then you may not acknowledge it, because to acknowledge it, it's a whole nother level of pain. And so there's so many layers to it. But like I said, once you see it, once you know it, once you acknowledge it, then it's what am I going to do with it? Because I can't tuck this away. I can't just tuck it away. I can't unsee it. I can't unexperience it. And it takes you to a place of, okay, let's bring into some action. And I'm going to leave it there because I believe the conversation will go into more of that. But yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And Hazel, the same question, just your perspectives on where we are in our community, in our country related to race right now.
Yeah, and I hate that my connection went out, so I missed the first half of what Lee was saying. The second half was real good, for sure. And of course, I understood what Sharon was piggybacking on. So if I repeat something that was already said, apologies for that in advance. However, it is hard for me to say that we have seen much of a difference before, right? I recently just shared with someone who posed the question around, how do we recover from this? This is not normal. And my response was, it should have never been normal. This is something that is in the very fiber of the country, as this country has been constructed. And so what we're seeing today are just new ways of the same old fear tactics that have been used centuries ago and decades ago. So I am not one that is very optimistic on where we are when it comes to racism, because it is very much still in everything that we do. One thing I did catch Lee saying is that we're all impacted by it, and
Yes.
that's so true. And so I just see that it's just new ways of repeating some of the same things. So we have, modern day lynchings that our Black and brown brothers and sisters are not being hung from trees, but they're being gunned down in the streets at the hands of police officers, right? We still are seeing voter suppression even to this day with locked mailboxes. I mean, so the list goes on and on. So what do I think about where we are in this country? Where have we changed, really?
Yeah.
So that is my question.
Okay, definitely. And thank you for sharing that. And it is the recognition that, it seems like that we move forward, but we really haven't. And things that have been happening for decades and generations are still happening to this day. And that's the hard part of it. So even when the Lord put it in my spirit about healing the wounds of racism, I understood what God was saying, but I said, there's an acknowledgement that still has to be had. It's almost like a reckoning and acknowledgement to understand where we are as a people and as a country with that. And I know a couple of you had shared, the recognition too, as we think about just the experiences and trauma, just our personal experiences with racism. Definitely over the last few months, and especially with the issue with George Floyd, it just really honestly triggered a great deal of me within me and had me think about my initial experiences with racism. And I know as practitioners and therapists, when it comes to trauma, many times it is that early experience that stays with you for a very, very long time and impacts so many aspects of your life. And for me, it's interesting. I had shared with some of our alumni that I am a former resident of Butler Tarkington. So I grew up around the corner from CTS. And my first experience with racism was in the 3rd grade. And I was actually at Holcomb's Gardens behind Butler University with a group of friends playing. And we had some two of our friends were just running around, and then 2 guys came across the canal, some young boys from across the canal who lived in Rocky Ripple. And at the time, again, this is the 70s, I'm taking us way back. But the guys came over, and we were a group of Black kids, and they were 2 white kids. And, we didn't want to play with them. We teased them. And about 20 minutes later, we heard gunshots. And we heard their fathers were actually running across the canal, shooting guns at us and calling us the N-word. So that was my first experience in the 3rd grade of experiencing racism. And the reality is that stuck with me. That stuck with me over the years, and that stuck with me and impacted me from a trauma experience. And so it's just that recognition that this goes way back for us. And talking into friends and colleagues, with everything that has happened in the last few months, it's almost like a triggering for many people, but then also a high level of frustration and recognizing that we're still dealing with the same things. For you as well, when you think about your first experiences with racism, how has that impacted you, and how has that informed kind of where you are today? Lee, can we start with you?
Only if you want to.
Yes, I do, sir. I know. I need to get ready. And then also, the one thing I did not do in our prayer before we started was to pray over the technology, because we all recognize that the enemy is busy. So we're going to mute unless we're speaking so that the audience can hear.
Sure. You know, there. So let me say this. I think as children, um, we kind of just navigate life. You see a playground, you see people playing, you go play. That's what happens when you're 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, um, and when you didn't get picked for the team that you all were playing for in the sport, you just chalked it up as, well, shoot, maybe I suck, maybe I'm just not, good. But then you turn 16, 17, 18, 20, 30, 50. You start you reflect on these experiences, and it's like, oh snap, this is what they were really trying to say, you know. And I've gone through that process and have cried tears, um, no, from the moments that I knew something was going on, but I didn't realize what it was. I didn't have words for it, and so I can go back to, being 5 years old, sitting in the back seat with my father. We get pulled over. My father is like, upset, and all I knew at 5 years old was, Dad's upset, we going to jail. and it's all I knew, but I didn't know, you know, he was legit on all these different layers. He just happened to be driving through this area, and cop, and I'm 5. Um, that was a silent ride home because my dad didn't want to cuss him out too strongly in front of me at the time. Uh, but I feel that same pain having been pulled over. I speak from that pain every time I get pulled over. it manifests, it shows up even today, and that was over 20 years ago. So it's an interesting, over 30 years ago. Oh, snap. Anyway, it's a real thing that trauma manifests and kind of streamlines through the course of life. I'll stop right there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. It is that recognition that it can happen so early in life and it sits with you. It sits with you in ways that you don't even realize until it manifests in a different way. How about for you, Hazel?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. The city that I lived in and growing up is predominantly Black, so I didn't have much interaction with any other people who didn't look like me growing up. So all of my teachers were Black. My neighbors were Black. The store clerks were predominantly like me. I mean, this was the area that I lived in. And it wasn't until we moved out of that city into a more rural town that I was the only one who looked like me. So my first interaction with racism came at the age of 12, 13. However, I feel like in some ways I was prepared for, well, tried to be prepared for those types of interactions based off of the education that I got as a young child and from family members who fought in the civil rights movement, who were very active in that or what have you. And so when it happened, I still didn't have language for it.
Hmm.
Although I've been warned about these things, I'm a kid. So I don't know how to conceptualize what went on. And of course, again, as we've been saying later in life, that stays with you. So every new encounter reminds you of that first one and that second one and that third one, and then you get language for it. So after going through the process of being in environments and in spaces, for me personally, where I was the only Black face or one of few Black or brown individuals, and you go through the whole assimilation and all of this, and then you're mad at yourself for that, and you're mad at yourself for not standing up, but you're realizing you're a kid. You don't know. But you don't know that until you're older, right? And you get language for it. And that language becomes liberating so that you can understand and have words for those experiences. So now you're liberated in it, but you're still hurting from it, right? And so it's really hard for me to grapple with the healing the wounds from racism, because if we're always impacted by racism, how can we truly heal from it? So what I had to learn how to do is to relate to those racist, microaggression, however you want to label it, those experiences in a way that it doesn't take all of my power, my worth, and my value from me. That I can still own that for myself in the midst of coming up against my oppressor every time
Mhm.
that I'm in these institutions or in these spaces.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And that is the recognition that it's lived each and every day. And I think just the last few months, there's created an opportunity for broader, more open dialogues within the African American community, but also with other communities, Latinx, our white brothers and sisters. But it's interesting when I share or when other individuals share the depth of racial experiences that we've had, there's a surprise because there's a piece of not knowing if you haven't walked in our shoes. And so that's part of that dialogue as well. But I completely agree with you. Again, when the Lord put it in my spirit, it's like healing from the wounds of racism, but you're also dealing with the fact that you're constantly wounded. And so how do we walk through that? But I do want to dialogue about that next after Sharon, just talking about as practitioners, how we deal with trauma. But Sharon, I want you to share as well.
What comes up for me? I love school. I truly love school at a young age, and like kindergarten, preschool. My mother would tell the story of me coming home from school, kindergarten, preschool, first grade, And I would tell her that I couldn't watch cartoons, I couldn't watch TV because I had to do my homework. So she was like, okay, this is a different type of child. She didn't have to give me that kind of structure because I put it in place for myself. But I can recall, and I believe it was around third grade, and had a teacher, I would say picking on me truly. And she called my mother, and my mother, knowing me, she really wasn't going for that. And so she was able to see the whole picture. She was able to find out that things that said that I hadn't turned in, I absolutely had. She was able to get to the bottom of it. But I say all this to say she had my back. She knew her child, and that helped me to navigate some of those spaces in which, if I didn't have the backing of strong parents, then it would have been a different situation. I didn't have to do this all in of myself, and that's what made it amazing. Had a couple other experiences. I actually was told that I was pretty for a black girl, black lady. I was a young adult. And so to be told that I was pretty for black girl, black lady, that threw me because I was confident in myself, and the whole thought of pretty for anybody. I mean, I'm just pretty, beautiful. That's what it is. And so that made me just take a step back, and I'm thinking, okay. And I had to tell this individual, nope. It was actually, I believe, meant to be a compliment, but it absolutely wasn't. And so I had to do some educating in that space. And it's like, wow, I am seeing different. And various times pointed out that, okay, you're seeing different as me, or you're seeing different as your people, or you're seeing different. It's okay. If I'm seeing this way, let me embrace who I am fully, and then it truly won't matter how I'm seen. But various experiences, and can go on and on and on and on, of times where something is seen as being a compliment, kind of setting you apart, and it's absolutely not a compliment, because this is about me. This is about me and everybody that looks like me, and it's a shared experience, and that's the way that I take that. So various experiences throughout life.
Okay, great. Thank you. And as we think about, those experiences across the African American community, and recognizing that each of us have had our individual journeys and continue to have our journeys when it relates to racism, but it's the recognition that it is trauma. It is trauma. And that's what I understand at a deeper level, even in my own personal journey, in my own journey of therapy, recognizing that trauma is trauma. But I want to get your perspectives as therapists, as practitioners. Is trauma trauma? How is racial trauma different than any other trauma that we've experienced? Lee, I'm going to go back to you on that question first. I saw your facial expression. I just knew you had something you wanted to share.
No, I like to think. I like to find some footing. Why I just blurred the first. Um, but what has come up is I think something that Hazel uh, was referring to a bit ago. Um, this is a trauma that you can't necessarily escape, can't get away from it. You can't turn it off. Um, you quite literally engage this uh, cause of trauma daily. You know, you walk into the store, you get in your car, you see, uh, you know, it just shows up all the time. It's not the same as a breakup. You're in a relationship, it's a traumatic breakup. I get it. We're gonna deal with with the trauma of this breakup um, for some months, for some years. But we're not necessarily. And I don't want to like rank traumas. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But I am trying to say we might not have to see that person again that we just broke up with. But racism being a characteristic that shows up in people, uh, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes that's the intention for it to show up, and sometimes they do it without, they're just being them. They're just doing what they've always done, but they don't know the source of this act and this action. It comes from, it is rooted in racism. And, I would say, especially for our academic institutions today, you know, that might be a whole nother stream of thought. But this trauma definitely is absolutely different from the other traumas, other types of traumas, simply because we meet this one daily, uh, and for the entirety of our lives, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing. Hazel?
Yeah, I really don't have much to add to what Lee has said, as it pertains to the difference in how it, it shows up. Again, not wanting to rank traumas, but it is something that you deal with day in and day out. Now, some days may be better than others, just like any other traumatic experience that we have. I would. So again, I have not much more to add to what Lee has already described, but I want to answer the question from a clinical professional standpoint, viewpoint. And so why is it that this particular type of trauma is often so hard for our clinicians to address in the therapy room, right? And so what makes this trauma a challenge to address as opposed to domestic violence trauma, as opposed to some other sort of childhood trauma, right? Because see, those traumas, we can go to the DSM-5 and we can point some things out. We can do some research and we can learn what the textbooks are saying about it, right? Racial trauma and racial or racialized trauma, that's not in the DSM-5. It is coded under criteria for PTSD. But then if we talk about racial trauma in the therapy room, are our clinicians in the field culturally sensitive and culturally competent enough to handle the nuances and the uniqueness in each and every experience without feeling uncomfortable? This is a messy topic.
Yeah.
And trauma is messy. And so, yeah, it's, and this is one that is not going away anytime soon. So we have to find ways to not only acknowledge it, be aware of it, but also ways to cope with it. And as clinicians, we have to be able to provide that space and those skills to help people through it. So I don't want to rank different traumas, but this is not one that just goes away.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I understand. I completely understand what you're saying. And it is that recognition that dialogues on race just make everybody extremely uncomfortable. But if you don't get to the point where you can have the dialogue, how can you get to healing? That is where the challenge is, to really come to that place of being open. And I agree with you, Hazel, on that opportunity for clinicians and practitioners to be really trained in this area. Because I wondered, with post-traumatic stress disorder, are there some similarities there? But it's not post-traumatic stress disorder because it's not over. So it's a continuation, as we talked about. And so that is the opportunity. And I think that's the opportunity that we have. I am not a practitioner like you wonderful folks, but that you have in the counseling center and all the great work that we're doing through CTS. That's an opportunity that we have because we are, training individuals in these areas. And so this is a critical piece. And as you shared, Hazel and Lee, and all of you are shared, it's not going anywhere. It is not going away. It's only a continuation. And I truly believe, as much as I really appreciated the devotional this morning that God put in my spirit, around healing, and that he is the ultimate healer, but he blesses us multiple times because he is the ultimate healer, but he also trains individuals to help us along the healing journey. But if we can't have honest conversation around it, we can't heal. And so really coming to that place. But Sharon, I wanted to have you share as well.
Makes me think in terms of how when we don't acknowledge the experience of the client with racism and what they're experiencing, how traumatizing that can be, because we all need to be validated within our experiences. And so here's a whole nother layer. I look at it as layers on top of layers on top of layers on top of layers, and allowing the client to come in with whatever they're experiencing, to have a safe place to be able to father those things. Think about spaces in which I've entered and I've only been able to take parts of myself. And then what happens to all those parts that are not allowed to show up? Those parts that are quieted, those parts that are told that you don't belong here when it's supposed to be a safe space. So it's extremely important that we find those spaces, that we provide those spaces, and that we fight for those spaces. The whole thing around Black Lives Matter, I am puzzled as to why it's an argument whatsoever. And for me, that has been traumatizing to have to continue to argue about it. I've never heard anything on that level. Just to have to continue to share those. I think about geese. I mean, it's the strangest thing. I think about geese, and for some reason, some way, geese know they are a protected species. They will have you wrecking your car, and they will be in the middle of the street. You'll be swerving. You know, if those things come to attack you, you can't even fend them off because the chances are you're going to get prosecuted and go to jail. I think about our dogs, even with dogs. You can't abuse them and think that you're not going to penitentiary. Somehow, some way, you can abuse, you can misuse, you can do all kinds of things destructive to Black people and get away from it. I'm trying to figure out at what point people will be deputized to be able to go and decide the way they would treat people. And now we have people who feel that they can treat Black people any kind of way. It's very traumatizing to me to realize that someone can decide that they want to exact a punishment or want to kind of close in some way, and that I may not be vindicated. I may not be able to get what I'm deserving in that space. And I don't myself people who look like me. Very traumatizing. I've got so many nephews and nieces, but when I think about all of my nephews and the fact that they have to leave home and they can be targeted, nieces that are targeted, all these people that I know, family, friends who look like me, and the fact that I can't protect you, all of that is traumatic for me. And so I have to compartmentalize it, because to walk around and to think about all these areas in which I have no power can be very difficult. My spirituality definitely plays in as well. It's just like I said, layers. I'm going to leave it at that, but it's layers, because I believe that we'll get into another piece of it as we continue. But it's all traumatic. We have to have some create safe spaces, and we have to have safe spaces in order to bring all of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. And we do have a couple of questions for those that are joining us online as well. There's one question: are there racial undertones in DSM-5? Hazel, that's something that you reference.
It is something that I reference. I'm going to be, and this is personal opinion, not professional opinion. White institutions always have or can always present intentionally or unintentionally, racial undertones. When I think about the leaders in the field that I have studied throughout the program, none of them look like me. Very, very few have I read a journal article or what have you look like me. Now, again, there is a cultural competency piece and cultural sensitivity piece that is required and should be something that as clinicians we continue to educate ourselves on, and not just African American culture. I'm talking culture broadly, that we should be continuing to educate ourselves on, so that when we have to use the DSM-5, we are using it appropriately to the culture in which our client is embodying. And so therefore the use of it could not could minimize the risk of having some racial impact. However, our healthcare system is very much infested by systemic racism. So I'm gonna stop there.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And Sharon had raised this, and you guys have raised this as well. It's just so very layered. It's so very layered. There are multiple layers because there is systemic racism that has been in this country for hundreds of years. And so, we're not going to solve that within a period of time. And, I have been appreciative of so many folks of all colors for the last few months who have just had a higher level of recognition of what we're experiencing. But as we think about trauma, and as we think about you all as practitioners, there was another question around, just this issue of how do we navigate towards a reconciliatory place. But I do want to just talk about, what can we be doing now in looking at how do we begin the healing process? Because despite the fact that we are experiencing on a daily basis, I know from my own therapy journey how critical it is that you have to start healing, that you have to go through that healing journey. So for you all as practitioners, how do we help communities, especially the African American community, how do we help our community start to heal? Sharon?
Yeah, so what comes up for me, I think about my healing process. And like I said, it's ongoing. It's important to check in with yourself regularly, check in with yourself daily, to see what it is that you're needing and to answer that. Whatever it is that comes up, okay, how can I answer that? Because I believe that we haven't been validated for so long. It's kind of like that invalidation for so long that in some ways, like, can I trust my own voice? Can I trust what it is that I feel that I need? And to be able to trust yourself, that's the first thing that needs to take place. Because if I can't trust myself, then I'm absolutely going to have a difficult time trusting anyone around me. And if I have needs and I'm not speaking to them, I'm not seeking to have those filled, then I'm telling myself that I can't be trusted to meet my own needs. And then what does that say about the world around me? So before we look to reach out and heal the world, I say reach in and heal yourself. So I have my morning, and I'll call them morning rituals. I've got to get up. I've got to do my praise and worship. I've got to do my meditation. I've got to get into my word. I've got to do all those things that are filling for me. And then throughout the day, I need to continue to check in with myself. So I walk in the morning, but guess what? I may need to walk in the evening as well. Like yesterday, walked in the evening, in the morning, walked in the evening. And just take that time and not allow myself to be even guilted into feeling that I need 1,000 clients, because everyone's saying that there's so many people in need. But guess what? Making sure that I'm okay. All those people that I'm meeting with, I'm not going to support them in the proper way of meeting their needs either. So just making sure that in the best space that's possible, acknowledging what I'm experiencing. Oftentimes, to get through the day to day, we're kind of stuffing things down, because if I truly was to think about this experience, it may take me to a very low place. But give myself space, permission to be in that space, to acknowledge what it is that I'm experiencing, to be able to process it, and not to make myself believe that it's not okay to feel whatever it is. So I just accept all of my parts, and then I encourage others to do the same, not just the happy parts. I've got lots of happy parts, but guess what? I've got some angry parts, I've got some sad parts, I've got some frustrated, confused, I've got all those parts. And if nobody else will give me space for those parts, I have to do that for myself. That to me is what's most important. Teaching people how to be there for themselves and to work. We can work together, but I'm going to need you to have an active part in healing yourself as well, and to tap into your spirituality if that is the resource that you need as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll pose the same question to Lee as well. Just, and thinking too, the honest understanding that many in the African American community, and this may be a generalization, but this has been my experience, there's a hesitancy to seek out help, and there's a hesitancy to seek out therapy and really going through that therapy journey. But how do we help our community as individuals, and even, as clinicians, as you are seeing individuals, how do we start the healing process? Lee, can you share a little bit?
There's hesitation, absolutely, and rightfully so. It is expected that there be hesitation for one jumping into therapy, as it has been used to abuse for so long. And so we're just, I don't want to say just like today, but we have reached a point where um, we are now able to look at the things that we've been doing for centuries as survival techniques and see those as therapeutic. Like, oh snap, we've always been therapists to ourselves, therapists to our families, to our congregations, therapists to our communities, in a sense, by doing all of these, uh, you know, mantras and rituals and prayer and just joining, just being in community as Black folks in this country. Us hanging out together is a form of therapy. Okay. I need to get with my people sometime and just like be,
Yeah.
because quite literally, uh, finding a safe space is not really a thing to me. Uh, but you find this space where you can be your fullest, truest, authentic self, and you get to laugh as loud as you want to, and you get to, you know, that is a therapeutic space, that I would call it. So we definitely need more of those. But actually, the therapy room, the actual room where therapy happens, where it's a one-on-one thing, a group thing, a couples thing, a family thing, that is absolutely necessary as well. That is uh, your time. That is a moment where you get to let your hair down, and hopefully you have a relationship with your therapist, where you've reached that point where you feel like you can let your hair down and just be you, and speak from the center of your pain. Mm. And speak from the core of your experiences. I think if we are able to find that, um, and live into a modality that allows us that kind of a centering, that kind of an authenticity, um, I think we begin to engage the world around us a bit differently, because now the thought of a policeman being behind me and pulling me over just for DWB can cause me to stay at home and not go anywhere. It can literally arrest me and I would stay in my home. Uh, let me just do some Uber Eats, something, so to where I don't have to engage and be in my vehicle. But I do this thing where I have to, like, I have to build up something that's on the inside, like Mr. Ron was saying. I have to build up something on the inside that allows me to not care to some degree that these things will happen, to expect them to happen even, and prepare my energy for such things. I could definitely go deeper, but I think I'll pause right there.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Hazel, how about for yourself? You know, just thinking about encouraging those in the African American community, recognize, completely agree with Lee that it's that community that has supported us. And sometimes I say we're the most resilient people I've ever seen in existence, because that resiliency and persistence has had to be there. But then looking at recognizing, like the work that you all do through the counseling center, the value of really seeking out individual help. What are your thoughts on really encouraging individuals who might be hesitant to do that, just for perceptions in our community? You know, I've heard Black people say, no, I'm not going to go to a therapist. I don't agree with that. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I was that person. That was me. Before I went to therapy, I was like, I'm not going. I was given a prescription for antidepressant meds and a list of therapists, and I said, I'm not doing that. And found myself in therapy with someone. It was actually in the community, right? So this particular person just so happened, I didn't know at the time, was a CTS alum in residency, was also in my community, and caught on to what I was going through. And in our conversation, that led me to therapy.
Okay.
So again, it's the reaching in, it's the community. We are our best resource sometimes. The things that, as Lee was saying, that we naturally do can also be things that are therapeutic. And so I think the other piece is more people talking about their therapy experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the more that we normalize therapy, the more that especially Black people normalize therapy, the more that we can get our churches on board and our pastors on board to normalize therapy and not make it some on theology, then we can get somewhere, right? But also in the therapeutic space. I mean, I love what Lee and Sharon was saying, and it's something that I try to create for my clients. The word that kept coming up for me is embodiment. I want my clients to be fully embodied in our therapeutic space. And the way that I invite that is by myself being fully embodied in the therapeutic space. So now we have this beautiful human connection as well as the therapeutic relationship, and they feel liberated and free to express themselves and name those experiences, even if they don't have language for it, but to be able to express it however they see it. And they can, as we said, let their hair down. But if I'm not embodied myself, and I'm not modeling that, will my clients feel comfortable enough to do that with me in session? So I have to reach in. I have to be aware of what I am going through. It wasn't until about a few years ago, while at CTS, where I even developed language for some of my racialized experiences. So I had to then go back to therapy to work that out, right? And so yeah, it's creating an embodied experience so that my clients have a space, if they don't have it anywhere else, where they can be whatever that looks like for them and not be gaslighted in the process, not judged in the process. They could just be.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great summation, and just the recognition of the work that is being done at the Christian Theological Seminary, at the Counseling Center. And that was part of the reason, too, to have this dialogue for the community, especially the African American community, but the full community, to understand the resources that are available. And the recognition, as we've talked about for this past hour, it is so very layered. And it is a process, as you all know, as practitioners, that healing journey through that trauma. is definitely a process. My last question for you is, what role does forgiveness play in this healing?
It is the first player in the game. I'm thinking about a game system where there's, two controllers. Forgiveness is controller number one.
Yeah.
First player. I mean, quite literally, forgiveness, grace, right there. Without, and for ourselves, forgiving ourselves for wearing the armor, for having to wear the armor, for not allowing ourselves to cry, to be mad, to be just to be, forgiveness of ourselves for moments like that, absolutely necessary.
Other thoughts on forgiveness?
Yeah, I would
Think
say
about forgiveness.
I would just say in twofold, right? It's definitely that initial player. It's not something that I try to rush people to, but it is the first player, and then the freedom of forgiveness, right? So I think sometimes we forgive, and we think that we're good because we forgave, whether it's ourselves, whether it's other people, or whatever the case may be. But we oftentimes miss the layer of the freedom of forgiveness, where we really address the wounds that have been formed out of the act that caused the wound, right? So we forgave, but now we got to walk into the freedom of it and address that wound that's there.
Okay, definitely. Well, we're coming close to our time. I wish we would have had an hour and a half for this conversation. We might have to do a continuation. I did, in my quiet time with God, he gave me 2 titles: Healing the Wounds of Racism and Walk in My Shoes. And I think that this time together has served both purposes, to really share with the community, but just recognizing that it is, as you all have said already, it's so very layered. But there has to be the healing. And I love the fact that you reiterated that there has to be a level of self-forgiveness, but it is also forgiveness of others, in that recognition and seeking the assistance that we need. So I wanted to make sure, I know that we have contact information at the bottom of the screen for you all to be contacted, that anyone who wants to reach out to you can reach out to you at the Counseling Center, and to just tap into the services and support of the Counseling Center and CTS. Because as we've already shared, this isn't going anywhere. This is with us for a long time. And whether it's the African-American community or the broader community, at some point, we all have to come together to heal the wounds of racism, because we've all experienced it in some way. So I have to just say thank you, thank you, thank you for your willingness to participate in this dialogue. I definitely know this conversation could continue and will continue, and just celebrate each and every one of you for the amazing work that you're doing on behalf of individuals that are in need. As I prayed earlier, I know you pour out daily. And so I just continue to pray that God pours back into you so that you can support and serve the community and the clients that you do. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate the dialogue and the conversation.
Thank you.
All right.